Hello, everyone, and welcome to Atlantic Debrief Central Europe Week edition. This is the Atlantic Council's Europe Center's internet show and podcast on the most pressing issues impacting transatlantic relations today. My name is Korewa. I am the director of the Atlantic Council's Warsaw office, and my guest today is Ignacy Niemczycki. He's a Secretary of State in the Chancellery of the Prime Minister of the Republic of Poland and Deputy Minister for European Affairs. And we are delighted to be recording this debrief in Warsaw as we kick off the Polish portion of Central Europe Week. Our discussion today is part of the Atlantic Council's annual Central Europe Week conference, which is a series of public events, roundtables, and spotlight conversations taking place between December 9 and 13 in Washington, but also this year in Vilnius, Warsaw, and Prague. The goal of Central Europe Week is to foster dynamic U.S. Central European partnership and drive forward common approaches to tackle pressing challenges for the transatlantic community. In today's debrief, we will be discussing the upcoming Polish presidency of the EU with one of the key officials responsible for delivering the priorities of the presidency. So to get right to it, Mr. Minister, as we know, starting in January, Poland will take up the rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union. So what are Poland's priorities for the coming 6-month term?
Right. First of all, thank you so much for having me. And I must say that I myself, but the whole team is very excited about the presidency. It's a very special time for any member state to hold the rotating presidency. In theory, you're only responsible for setting the agenda, running the meetings, but we all know that in practice, it's much more. Your question about priorities, I think, is a crucial one. But first, let me say that this will be a presidency of opening things rather than closing things. And this is mainly because our presidency coincides with a new mandate of the European Commission. So as most of you know, we do have a new College of Commissioners from 1st of December. And they're still figuring out some details. So what will be presented when, what kind of legislative actions they will take. So in that regard, please keep in mind that the Polish presidency will be very much about opening discussions, framing discussions, delivering on things like conclusions. But I don't think we'll be able to achieve that much when it comes to legislation itself. But I still think this will be a very important presidency. And finally, to answer your question about priorities, so it will be no surprise that the presidency will be framed around the theme of security. Given what is happening at the eastern border of the EU, given the conflicts in the Middle East, given the uncertainty in transatlantic relations, given a possible trade war with China, we feel that security is the most important issue to be discussed right now. And we also see this when we look at opinion polls and when you ask citizens here in Europe, what do they need the most right now? Most of them will say we need stability and we need the sense of security. So we want to respond to that. However, security, being that the main theme, will be understood in a very broad way and will encompass at least 7 dimensions. The first one, and probably the one that we'll be talking the most about today, is the so-called external security. So obviously the issue of Russia, the issue of Ukraine, how do we cooperate between EU and NATO? How do we make the European defense industry stronger? The second dimension is internal security, so issues like migration, but also civil preparedness. So how do we make sure that the society is able to respond to hybrid threats and that is ready to face them? The third dimension is information security. So how do we work with disinformation, foreign interference? How do we respond to that? But also how do we make sure that the civil societies in European member states are strong. How do we make sure that rule of law is in place? Then another dimension is energy security. It's quite clear that after such a long time of Russia's aggression towards Ukraine, we need to finally stop importing gas and oil from Russia, all of us in Europe. So this will be key for us. But also, how do we ensure that the energy infrastructure is ready when it comes to large-scale incidents and cyber threats? Then another dimension, and especially important to me, given my background, I used to be an Undersecretary of State at the Ministry of Economic Development and Technology, is so-called economic and business security. So how do we ensure that there is a level playing field? We feel that China has been subsidizing its companies quite a lot, and this has put European companies in a rather difficult situation. So I'm very excited about this part. Also discussions, how do we make sure that the single market of the European Union works in a better way? Probably some of your of our listeners know that the single market in Europe is a thing, but most of you probably don't know that it works quite well for goods, but it doesn't work that well for services. And according to Commission's own data, even today, 60% of the barriers in the single market are the same ones that we had 20 years ago. So there's really quite a lot to be done. And untapped economic potential is roughly between 250 and 450 billion euro a year. This will be an additional GDP gain. Then we have another two dimensions. I've already been speaking quite a lot, so I'll make that fast. One is health security. So how do we ensure that we're also able to produce crucial medicine here in Europe? And the last one is food security. So the future of agriculture and farming in Europe.
Thank you. I mean, that's a fascinating and also very timely agenda, to say the least. I mean, last time Poland held the presidency was back in 2011, I believe, which I was actually here and living in Warsaw at the time. It was an election year as well in Poland. What are some lessons learned from that presidency? How will this one differ? If there are any thoughts
Sure.
you can give me.
So I was actually involved in the first Polish presidency. So that's maybe I'm also so excited about this one because I know it's an important exercise. I think first of all, it will be different in that we do have, and I mentioned this already, that we do have a new mandate of the Commission. In 2011, our main role was to deliver on legislative files. Yeah, so something is in the pipeline already, and you want to take the work forward. Whereas this time, I think it will be a more nuanced presidency in that our main goal will be to frame discussions. Also, given the international context, I think there's a lot of hope when it comes to the Polish presidency. We have elections in Germany. We don't have a stable situation in Paris. So that really puts us at the very center of what's happening in Europe. So there are high hopes. In 2011, I think we mostly wanted to prove that we can do it, and we could. It was a successful presidency, but this time around, I think the expectations are quite higher.
Great. So speaking of that, obviously what you just mentioned with Germany and France, in what ways could Poland leverage this presidency to play a larger role in the European Union if you've given thought or been thinking about it in those terms, particularly considering the domestic political agendas are sort of going to consume much of the bandwidth of these typical European powerhouses like France and Germany.
Right. So for me, the most important aspect of that is, I think, relates to transatlantic relations. So how do we make sure that our partners in Berlin and Paris have the same understanding of transatlantic relations as we have? And I think, obviously, with Trump administration, we're not sure what to expect. But still, our approach is that we need to be positive about transatlantic relations, that we need to have a positive narrative. So if you're asking about leveraging, I think the hope here is that we'll be able to ensure EU's unity, but also make sure that others really understand our point of view when it comes to transatlantic relations, because it's so important also when you talk about Ukraine and other challenges.
I'll ask about Ukraine in a moment, but speaking of transatlantic relationship, obviously we have a new incoming U.S. administration. We mentioned Trump. There's a lot of people expect that he will change the dynamic in the transatlantic relationship. Let's put that diplomatically. But it's also very interesting because we have a new European Commission, as you mentioned, a new American administration, and Poland is taking over the presidency, right at this moment with these new leaders coming in. So there is this chance of kicking off the U.S.-European relationship on sort of a positive, constructive note. Where do you expect there will be natural areas of cooperation with the new U.S. administration?
Well, so I think certainly energy, and I think that's part of the proposal that will come out of EU institutions, but also member states. As I mentioned earlier, we need to end our dependence on Russian gas and oil. So we need imports from other countries, and US LNG would be a perfect fit in that. And this would also help with the trade deficit that Trump is so worried about. So I think energy is I see a potential there. Then obviously defense spending, and also answering to your previous question, this is the detail that matters. You might know that right now we're discussing the so-called European Defense Industry Program, which will basically be a framework to how we spend European money on the defense industry. And we want to make sure that member states are still able to buy from like-minded countries like US. So I think defense spending will be yet another area where we can cooperate with the US. And again, this would help with the deficit. And a third area where I don't think we agree 100%, but I think we did take important steps in Europe in the last couple of months is China. So we do see that China is using subsidies to distort the market. We've seen it in EVs. We see it in some other areas. And I think on that, we would be able to cooperate with the US administration because we do believe in free trade, but there needs to be a level playing field.
No, I think if you want to talk about defense, energy in China, you will certainly find people in the new administration who are willing to cooperate. And I think the framing is exactly right as well. So Ukraine was mentioned. And speaking of Ukraine, I mean, the brutal invasion that Putin started in Ukraine has sort of renewed the energy behind EU enlargement. And of course, Poland has long been a champion of EU enlargement. So how is the Polish presidency hoping to sort of affect the enlargement process? Are we talking about Ukraine, potentially Moldova? Things are not looking so great in Georgia right now, or maybe they will be. If we look at the Western Balkans, what are your thoughts on that?
Right, so we've always been fans of the enlargement process. We feel it makes the EU stronger. So in general, I would respond that we'll try to push the enlargement process forward as much as possible. These allow me to focus on Ukraine for obvious reasons. I think we did send a very strong political signal both to Ukraine and Moldova. When we opened the negotiations, they do have those countries have the candidate status. And that's a very important political statement, declaration. I'm quite sure both of those countries will join the EU. At the same time, the enlargement process, and this is also our experience here in Poland, allows the country to modernize itself. This needs to be a merit-based process. So we do have this merit-based approach. I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to open 2 clusters of negotiations with Ukraine. But I'm also trying to be realistic. So I'm quite sure we'll open at least one cluster, so-called fundamentals. So things like the justice system. But if the situation allows, we'll certainly be happy to open another cluster as well, similar with Moldova. Then when it comes to Western Balkans, the process is ongoing, and it's very much in the interest of the EU, but also Poland to continue this process. So we'll be definitely supporting it.
Thank you. Indeed, it is a security matter as well. So in terms of enlarging the EU. Thank you so much. That's all we have time for today. Thank you to the audience for joining us. You can find our other Central Europe Week programming online at www.atlanticcouncil.org and follow along with all of the other public events on X under the hashtag Central Europe Week. Thank you so much again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.